Hey, how's it going?
Right. Speaking of, we have one here now. Hey, Dominic.
Oh, hi
Hello.
Dominic. Welcome
Alright.
to the ACA meeting. We're
Hello, Noah.
glad to have you.
This says Jonathan O, but I feel like it might be Julianne. She might be using a family member's computer, or I don't know the members of this team.
Hey, Andy. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you,
Yes.
Dominic.
What are we going to be going on about today, since I know some people can't make it?
Well, basically what we went over this whole week. So if you go back to the schedule and you see what pages we read, it's going to be a review of that.
Gotcha.
We're planning to chronological manner, just things we see there, but if anyone can come up with something that they really had trouble understanding, specifically in the math section, yeah, this is what that's for. I don't know the answers to everything, so I'm not going to be here to. But
We're gonna ACA figure it out.
Hi.
together. Oh, hi, Rolando.
I was just going to ask, I've been having trouble accessing the materials. I bookmark that
The Google Drive.
the Google Drive thing, but when I tried to access what was inside there, there was nothing. I tried to do the SoSci thing.
yeah, there's some options. I could probably send a link to but also stuff we can talk to Darrow about because
Okay.
You guys are cutting out. I can't understand you.
that's something you should. I could try to send you some of the documents. Like there's someone, ultimately that's Darrow's project, right? So you definitely want to bring that up.
Rolando,
Yeah,
can you see my screen right now?
yeah.
Okay. So, have you ever gotten into this folder, ACACATS 2020-21?
No.
Oh shoot. For me, I have it right here in my folders. You might have it in your bookmarks.
Okay.
And then what happens is I click on it, and then I go to the first folder, resource guides. And then I go to social science.
Oh,
Can you do that on yours or no?
Let me see if I can do that.
Here, I think Andy just sent the link if you want to click on that.
Yeah, that should be a direct link to the drive.
Wait, who's Christian?
I don't know. I don't know him.
Okay. Is everyone ready to get ACA going?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's start with. Well, let's start to make sure that everyone has a general understanding of the Cold War. This would be more of when we read Monday, we read a brief history of the Cold War as an introduction to the literary section. So basically it starts with the Yalta Conference with FDR, Stalin, and Winston Churchill. There's some sort of dispute, and they don't really know what to do with Germany, who they just defeated as allies in World War II. And one thing leads to another, and Churchill comes to the U.S. and proclaims the area they're disputing over as being divided by Iron Curtain. And the guy references that when Churchill said that this was the Iron Curtain, that was the Cold War. So that's the beginning. Do you have anything to say, Noah?
Oh, sorry. I was just trying to help Brody log in. He can't quite make it.
I can keep going.
So the Cold War is as you all know, basically the struggle between the Soviet Union and the American forces. And often they added complex fighting tactics because they couldn't go out to full out hot war because of mutually assured destruction. So the whole Cold War was basically this period, these very complex military strategies. They had to have proxy wars, and they had to have these very complex cultural diplomacy things. So it's overall just a very complicated period.
This isn't specifically just the Cold War. There's also everything in the Cold War. So you're talking about women's rights, LGBT rights, civil rights, along with the Vietnam and Korean Wars. And then you have the Cuban Missile Crisis. You have
The Vietnam and Korean Wars.
right, yeah, and then the rebellions. You're going to talk about third world rebellions as well. So it's much more than just Cold War. And it's more than just the U.S. and Cold War as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that Mr. Darrow?
That is Mr. Darrow.
No, it's the goat.
No, but when you're talking about cultural diplomacy, there's tons of Cold War tactics used. Mutually assured destruction as one. I believe that was drafted by McNamara, Secretary of Defense. And then you also have one of deference. There's like, if I have more nuclear weapons of you, you won't even think of attacking me. Is kind of a, and then Nixon had the madman strategy. He wanted to be depicted as someone who would send bombs off at any measures. So you see the government trying to work all these ways to use the nuclear weapons and all these strategies to outpower and manhandle the Soviet Union, and it results in because of what Noah said, the mutual assured destruction. If one nation sends the nuclear warhead, the other one will, and there will be a global. All the new members who are muted, does anyone have any questions on the timeline of the Cold War? Because I know it gets a bit confusing.
Well, I mean, I think all of us who've taken like, U.S. history have a basic understanding of the timeline. I think mostly. Although I guess, is there anything that we might have? Is there any major thing that we might have missed that wasn't covered in that class?
I think one major, like, if you're doing like an overview of the Cold War, a big thing could be the fact that like a lot of Americans were just really scared of like communism and like the spread of it. So a good example of that is like McCarthyism. So there was a senator named Joseph McCarthy who just like basically went on a rampage accusing like everybody of being communist. And then there was like one organization like
The HUHU.
House,
something.
House of Un-American Activities, I guess.
Yeah, and you know they would just kind of investigate people that they thought might have been.
Yeah. Have you guys? I don't know if this is anywhere significant, but you know, there were how do I say this? There's this one video about I'll probably send in the chat later. But are we going to? Is there any like, things that we might not have covered in that class, U.S. history, that is important to this?
Yeah, just relying on your U.S. history is not gonna help you at all. It goes into much more detail.
Okay.
Yeah,
yeah, it's true.
It goes into, like, for example, there's this one thing called the kitchen debate, and you have to know the in and outs of what Nixon and Khrushchev were talking about. And that's just one example of the specifics of the timeline that you're going to have to know all around.
Just
is
background
there,
is definitely beneficial though.
Are there any videos that are going to be assigned to us? Like, are we going to have to watch videos, or like could we do that for extra credit as like sort of helping our understanding?
Not for a grade. Right here in the summer, it's all self-propelled study and group studying, of course, but there's no grades in this summer at least. Yeah, cut you off, sorry. Noah, can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. What happened? My Zoom call's glitching for a second.
Everyone's is for some reason. You guys keep on cutting out on my end.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, it might be useful to watch some videos. I can send some videos in the group that I found that I think may be helpful. Those may help you get a little bit of extra context. Really, right now, you should just be trying to get a basic understanding. So when we go into the school year, you can have a good head start on the material.
Yeah.
I think Crash Course would probably be a good resource for a lot of it too. Just like kind of the basic things. Oh, the Yalta Conference. Oh, the Burnley Airlift. And if you kind of understand all those basic things, that helps giving like applying it and kind of synthesizing it to actually think about it conceptually. If you just know all the vocabulary.
Yeah, I just I haven't actually been studying this week. I was just kind of compressing after school was over. So
Yeah, that's what it's that. But
I
you could get a bit behind in the summer, but once the school year starts, if you get behind in the reading,
It's deadly.
How deadly exactly?
It's just kind of stressful because like I remember like I got like behind in like reading section 1 of art, so then I just skipped it and I did really good on the other sections, but then my score kept like kind of messing up because I never fully went back to section 1. But if I just stayed on time and like with the schedule the whole time.
Yeah.
I was wondering where I could access the schedule again, because I'm looking at the link and I do not see it.
I can send you the schedule right now. But that's gonna be like I'll repost it in the group me right now. Let's see. Because that is pretty far up if you've missed that message.
Oh, are we going to talk about Von Braun?
About what?
Oh, Von Braun.
Noah, do you recall Von Braun in the guides?
No, I do not remember that.
No, I don't remember that.
Let me do a search for that.
Maybe very briefly.
Would he be the person from Brown versus Board of Education?
Oh no, he's one of the scientists. One of the German scientists who helped with the space program.
No, the only scientists covered are U.S. ones and the military industrial complex in the Manhattan Project for both the U.S. and the Soviet. So there's no German scientists. There's Oppenheimer, the one who's he has the famous long quote. Oppenheimer is covered, and then there's this Russian guy. His name's escaping me, but he talks about he tries to reshape the theory of evolution to be more in a communistic ideology. So as far as space race scientists go, there's not a lot of specific science.
Oh, I found the Russian guy you're talking about. His name is Trofim Lysenko, and he's this Soviet agriculturalist, and
Right.
he doesn't like natural selection because he kind of ties it to capitalism. So then he has this funky theory where he argues individual biological traits are only from the environment.
Yeah.
So that kind of causes the US to argue, hey, the Soviets aren't about science and America is about pure science.
Yeah, no, what he does is he gets this seedling and he rubs ice cubes on it, and he says, now this plant will be able to resist cold temperatures. And we know that's not quite how it works.
Dang.
All right. You find anything else now?
Let me see. One interesting thing is you know how we were talking about mutually assured destruction?
Right.
That can actually be tied to game theory. So the Cold War actually helped develop game theory. And it came from John Nash.
Yeah.
And he had the Nash equilibrium, which was about Cold War nuclear warfare.
Yeah.
Basically, the game theory came about in this movement to kind of put everything into numbers. So they took the probability of the U.S. launching a missile, of the Soviets launching a missile, of the Soviets moving their troops here, and they calculated all those probabilities and designed it into a game, like a war game situation, and plugged those numbers into a computer. And
You get simulation.
What was that?
You get simulation.
Yes, a simulation, and from that they derived Nash equilibrium, that they're canceling each other out due to their military power. All right. What else, Noah? Honestly, maybe around 5. There's a lot of history to cover.
One thing that it talks about that I don't think is often mentioned is the military-industrial complex. And that was something President Eisenhower was worried about because during the Cold War, there was lots of kind of cooperation between corporations and the government. For instance, Boeing was making all these military aircraft, all these heavy equipment and missiles. And President Eisenhower, he didn't like this close coordination between military, scientists, corporations, because he thought all this power really posed a threat to American democracy.
Yeah, the military industrial complex is kind of like the grouping. You mentioned you took U.S. history. That's going to be around the mobilization of the nation's resources. The total war effort, it's expanded in a way that is creating a war-hungry society that just wants to get better than the Soviets. And wants to get better than the Soviets, they pour all their resources, death and warheads and weapons. And that's what the military-industrial complex is. And Eisenhower he claims that's corrupting the democratic spirit.
Yeah, because
That's
it
kind
kind
of
of gives.
ironic. That's kind
No,
of
yeah.
ironic because even today, Boeing and other private companies are, creating and inventing new weapons of warfare,
Exactly.
and we're still, putting out bids to the private sector for our military resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of just ignored Eisenhower.
Right.
And like it just kind of gives a profit incentive to war because they profit from making those weapons.
Mhm.
So they need war to keep making them and keep making more money. And that's what
Yeah.
Eisenhower is worried about.
Expanding on that note, I don't know if you could find the specific company. It's mentioned in there, but they're making warheads, and to this day, they still have about $55 billion in contracts insured from the.
And of course, we all know about Tesla and Amazon competing about contracts, at least when it comes to, like, I guess, space.
Yeah.
Although it might be weaponry too.
Or because the Cold War expands by just the space race. In the period before the space race, you have the mutually assured destruction, the strategy of deterrence, and both of those means we're going to have more nuclear warheads than you, and if you launch yours, we'll launch ours, and that evolves into proxy wars, like you see the Soviets and China. Once China's Mao Zedong takes over Chiang Kai-shek's corrupt democracy, he establishes a communist party, and they go help North Vietnam, and they go help North Korea with the Soviets, and the U.S. comes into South Korea and South Vietnam, and they basically fight. They take the Vietnamese and the Koreans and they make them fight each other for their own profit and for their own political strategy. It's not good.
Also, a big thing about proxy wars is that like a large part of the reason why the U.S. did them is because of like the idea of containment. Like we wanted to stop the spread of communism, and one like extra reason for that was like the domino theory, which basically is like, okay, if Vietnam falls to communism, then all these other nations are also going to fall to communism. So we were like scared, and we thought, okay, we have to fight to make sure these nations.
I think another interesting thing is even in countries that didn't pose like a direct warfare threat to America, like Guatemala, they democratically elected their leader, Jacobo Arbenz, and he was like fighting for the people and stuff, but America had incentive, and they were afraid of his left-leaning ties, so then they supported efforts to throw a coup that kind of threw Guatemala into chaos. So I think that kind of shows some of the moral ambiguity of both sides during the Cold War.
Yeah.
We also indirectly hurt a lot of people. Like, for example, in the Korean War, like most of the people fighting in the Korean War weren't even Korean, but like all the people were just in there fighting, hurting Korea, and they weren't even Korean, and they kind of made the war their own.
Can we talk about this is more my field of expertise, and I don't really think I'm an expert on anything related to this, but are we gonna talk about how like the Cold War sort of affected like pop culture and sort of the media from around that time? Because it's very interesting. Have you guys heard of Spider-Man life story?
Sort of.
It's okay. Well, if you don't know what it is, it's basically Spider-Man was created in 1962, and in his first couple of stories, he was around 15. So he would be he ages in real time. So basically, he's in around like his 20s or so during the Vietnam War, and he has this conflict on whether or not to enlist. But during like, the actual 1960s, it was painted as a good thing, whereas now, because of the benefit of hindsight, it sort of depicts everyone as a bit more doubtful and a bit more like, not as gung ho about it.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I think that might be perhaps touched on in the arts section. We only really went over social science and math this week. If you want to talk about the media around in the social science guide, another good thing to bring up is the Hollywood 10, which they, in the era of McCarthyism, of course, they proclaimed these actors and these film writers with the help of Richard Nixon. And J. Edgar Hoover and Richard Nixon claimed that these actors and screenwriters are guilty of Soviet espionage, and they ship them off the HUAC. They ship them off to federal prison, and in some cases, it like trickled all the way down, and it even led to the federal execution of the Rosenbergs. And basically, what happened in that case is the Rosenberg man was guilty of espionage, and then to get him to talk, they convicted his wife of the same crime, even though she didn't do it, and then they completely bypassed any court case and are executed within 2 years.
The Rosenbergs, they gave like atomic bomb secrets to the Soviets, right?
Well, the man did, because he was an electrician
Yeah.
on the Manhattan job,
And then they arrested his wife Ethel to try to get her to talk,
right, but she was completely innocent.
or there was no evidence of her guilt.
There was no evidence of her guilt. Yeah.
Hey, Andy, can you put the password to the meeting in GroupMe again? I think Stella's trying to join, but the password you put in was wrong.
Okay, yeah, I'll try it one more time. Has she tried the link, or I'm in here?
She said the link like didn't work.
Try the link, it didn't work.
Because I think she has to do it on her laptop, and she doesn't have GroupMe on her laptop.
Let me see what I can do. I have information
Right,
here.
good job, Andy.
There is a new meeting password. Well, the numeric password is right, but I will post a new password. It's 7NF4BH. Yeah. Hopefully that
So
helps.
putting some of those pieces together, where, there's a lot of money for the private sector in war, because they're getting these contracts to make war weapons, right?
Right.
And then also, there's this idea that we're, it's our duty to, stop communism around the world. And so we're sending troops around the world to fight communism. Do you think that there's any propaganda in that? Do you think that that was justified, or do you think maybe it's more propaganda in order to, because there's so much money in war?
I think like in section 2 of like the literature, I looked over it a little bit, and it talked about propaganda, like because there was like the Berlin airlift where the Soviet Union put like a blockade from like East to West Germany, so they couldn't transport materials. But then like the Western forces, like they sent like food and materials to those people, and then after the fact, they kind of made like these posters and stuff that kind of idealized the Americans and just kind of painted it as black and white, like Americans are good, Soviets are bad,
I
and they
think
use that as a form of propaganda.
Right.
you know, to be honest, I think it was. I mean, of course, it was. I mean, if any, I mean, it was usually these companies that were making this sort of propaganda, and of course they would, you know, as long as like there are proxy wars and programs in which they can compete for contracts, as long as they make a profit, you know, and it helps the bottom line. Of course, they're going to want, these wars and these conflicts to stay, you know, to stay where they are, basically.
I personally believe it was more political than economic. I don't think it really branches over into economic until you do get into the privatization of the economy and even more into the uranium proxy wars for the deposits in the Congo. But I think it's mainly political because once FDR is kind of the one who engages in this Cold War ideology, but he dies. And then you get Nixon and Kennedy. And these guys just literally don't like using it inside of that. Khrushchev had like a publicly psychological inferiority complex. And it comes, there's domestic turmoil and party turnage in both countries. And one person losing to the other side denounced that person's party. It was all about, we're better than Russia, we're better than US. And that's what drove politics. Like from this whole Cold War period, the president was literally won to their degree of anti-communism. Like, that's how they won. I think it was mostly political more than economic. And it may have started as a democratic idea to try to get everyone this freedom of to vote and to be a free nation, but it definitely devolved from that following FDR's death. And once you go further down the line, it gets political and surely economic, both propaganda.
Yeah, I think it kind of like devolved, like kind of what you were saying, like you can kind of say like we, like in a lot of ways it was like economic because we were trying to like prove that capitalism is better, like, oh, that's why we're investing all these resources in the space race and blah blah blah, because capitalism is so much better. But like that like shift to education and science was done through government spending, so that's partially ironic in the fact that we kind of used like taxes and government spending to win in the space race to prove capitalism is better.
Mm-hmm. You have anything to say now?
Oh, I think one thing is lots of the imperialism in the Cold War is also kind of tied to economics. Like if you look at Guatemala, both of the Dulles brothers, they had close ties to the United Fruit Company. So what America was doing in trying to throw a coup in Guatemala was protecting their economic interests. And also sometimes in the Middle East with US intervention, part of that was for oil and things like that. So I think it's kind of a mix of political and economic factors that led the US to do these things.
Also, a good example of like economic factors is like the Marshall Plan. I think that's the one where like they kind of gave these resources to these countries to kind of help them economically, to disincentivize them from becoming communist. So that's like an example of them utilizing economics for political purposes.
Right. But furthermore, they offered that same Marshall Plan stimulus package to the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union turned it, like there'd be an economic advantage of taking that money. But they turned it down for the sake of politics and for the sake of expanding their ideology. And it's politics, economics, they play perfectly. But no one really has the best interest of third world countries or the proxy wars. It's selfish interest and selfish interest, and it's all political and economic propaganda.
Sorry, you cut out. Can you?
Yeah, I could say that all again. So basically, it's equal parts political and economic propaganda, because in the Marshall Plan, the U.S. Offered the same stimulus package to the Soviet Union, and despite it being economic beneficial, they turned it down for the sake of strengthening belief in their ideology and not needing the U.S.'s help. Political move as well. Did you get that one? U.S. aircraft
Yes.
drop supplies. Though that weren't supposed. Yeah,
Oh, that was the Berlin airlift, I believe.
yeah. That was there. Nothing went wrong for the United States in that. There were planes shot down, but it eventually, yeah, it was a great move for the U.S.
I think when
Whether
the
you,
plane was shot down, that was something different. That wasn't quite the Berlin airlift.
no, planes got shot down in the Berlin
Yeah.
airlift. It was a repeated crusade. So,
Okay.
but
Okay,
no,
so-
you're talking about the U-2 spy plane being shut down while they're trying to make satellite maps of the missile silos in the Soviet Union.
hmm
That spurred basically that when that was going on, weirdly, Khrushchev comes to the America and like nothing really happens in terms of building up the conflict of that. Khrushchev comes, who's the Russian prime minister at the time, he comes to Hollywood and he like tours farms and he wants to go to Disneyland. So it was a really weird reaction from that. There was not too much military escalation from that.
I think we've been the only ones to talk, and I know that there are more people in the group. So
Well,
yeah,
everyone should say Akahai. Akahai.
Akahai.
Akahai.
Yeah, I think everyone is just, some people might just be listening, but nevertheless, I did record the meeting, so even people who missed are okay to rewatch this meeting anytime they want. But yeah, to everyone else
Nice.
here, you are able to, if you have any concerns or any questions about the content so far or in the class in total, please share.
Or anything to contribute.
Yeah. All right, Noah. Where are you at now? In the guide. You want to talk about civil rights and how they used Edith Sampson to disguise internal, just the internal
Yeah.
race
So
issues?
one criticism that is my Zoom call cutting out?
No,
It seems fine.
Yeah, everything seems good.
Seems fine.
Any freeze? Okay. Give me a second.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh, so what I was saying is, during the Cold War, one way that Russia and Russian propaganda kind of attacked the United States was through civil rights, because during this time, Black Americans didn't have very many rights, and there were these Jim Crow laws and the such. So the U.S. kind of tried to combat this through cultural diplomacy, where they would have people, including Black Americans, like travel throughout the Soviet Union to show, like, hey, progress can be made in America for civil rights under the democratic system that America has.
Yeah, and part of this was in fear that part of their money came from, jazz musicians and football and sports at the time. And if they pretty much took Black culture and pushed it out to all of the other states to strengthen American democracy. And what they got in turn for using this nation of people for their own private benefits, nothing.
I think you're cutting out.
Yeah, okay. I'll try one more time. So basically, the U.S. installed a UN diplomat by an African-American lady named Edith Sampson, and then they pushed out all African-American culture in terms of sports and music and art, and they pretty much cast their mirage of themselves that everything's okay at home and there's no racism. But once you got past this illusion, you're still going against Brown versus Board, the desegregation of schools. So they were hiding this civil rights problem because they perceived it as a weakness to the Soviets, as the Soviets used it against America and attacked them, calling them a weak country. So. That covers most of the civil rights movement right now.
One interesting thing, I don't know if it talks about this in the guides, is lots of the time the CIA would monitor different civil rights leaders.
Yeah.
Like the CIA
yeah.
spied on Martin Luther King like,
Mhm.
throughout his life, and they would spread like false rumors about him.
And
'Cause
he was also
they-
kind of a critic of the
Yeah.
capitalistic system.
yeah,
And then
they claimed that he was a communist
they
because
also said
he had
he
also
cheated on
criticized things
his
like the
wife,
Vietnam War.
which I
Yeah.
think he did cheat on his wife, but they basically like used these facts to kind of discredit him.
Yeah, they're trying to like bring down the civil rights movement.
Also think another thing, like I have no idea if it's in the guide either, but like LBJ, for example, like he was the one who signed like the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act in like 1965. And like a big thing about him is that like he was from Texas, and I think generally speaking, he kind of was more conservative leaning, and that's partially why JFK picked him as vice president, because it was kind of to kind of balance the ticket with kind of different sides of the party, with JFK being kind of more left leaning, and LBJ kind of representing more of a conservative Democrat. But kind of like JFK kind of had this like torch of like increasing equality in a sense, and LBJ, since like JFK was assassinated, he kind of just adopted that and kind of adopted that same legacy, even though people might not have expected that from him in the first place.
Yeah.
Because he probably may have felt that that was kind of his duty,
Mhm.
or he was like a reptile. Who knows?
Yeah, LBJ certainly, he signed off on the deal, but when it comes to terms of civil rights, Harry Truman is the one who starts the legislation for more equality. But that's largely part and due to, it's a political maneuver to strengthen all parts of the society or all parts of culture, to have a stronger cultural diplomatic appeal in the Soviet Union. I don't have evidence that it was for the benefit of any people.
Yeah.
Oh, according to Stella, LBJ got CIA to assassinate JFK to raise power because he knew he would lose election.
You won't be tested.
I wouldn't even be
Are
surprised.
we even going to cover the JFK like, assassination conspiracies, or are we not just gonna talk about that? Oh,
No, there's no conspiracy in the.
I'm just assuming it's like
joke.
JFK died, then LBJ became president.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. It lightly touches on. It just says JFK was assassinated and then moves on to LBJ.
okay, so we're not even gonna like humor people. Thanks.
No, and LBJ as a president is lightly touched. He's not really talked about too much in Guide, maybe a page or two. But when there's like 30 pages of Truman, 20 pages of Kennedy and Nixon. So LBJ is not a main focus of the Guide.
I think one thing that's kind of interesting is seeing the different presidents' approach. Like Truman, he used nuclear weapons, but then he was anti-nuclear weapons. And then Kennedy, he won election by talking about the missile gap. Kind
Which
of
wasn't even true.
misrepresenting. Yeah. So it's a little interesting how they're kind of taking advantage of the political situation to try to get power.
But it
And then
all,
also
yeah.
FDR was a lot more cooperative, mainly because of World War II. And then also on the flip side of it, like the Soviet Union, you have like Khrushchev like distancing himself from Stalin in a lot of ways.
He
Yeah,
tried,
de-Stalinization.
right, but it turned out to be
Yeah, it's rhetorically speaking.
it turned out to be hypocritical because you go to Hungary and they're like, well, if you're de-Stalinizing everything and Stalinization is bad, then the Stalin government, the Stalinized government we have, we're just going to overthrow it because you just said
And
it's bad.
then he sent in troops. It was like, no.
Yeah. So is he for it or against it? It's pretty contradictory of himself. But what he was really trying to do there is boost his appeal to other members of his peers to, you know, win re-elections and things like that. You see time and time again in the Russian history, people try to say, we need to go back to Marxist-Leninist foundations. We need to go back to Marxist. And every person that partakes in communism kind of erupts in some sort of murderous campaign, excluding the 2 African nations who partake in that. If you could look up the Congo and tell us a bit about Mabenga and Lumumba, I think.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. I didn't read this section like super in depth, but the Congo had a whole bunch of uranium in their Shinko Lobwe mine.
Yeah,
So what happened?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. It's a long section. So I think the Congo, they got independence from Belgium, and they kind of wanted to be neutral during the Cold War, and they kind of wanted to focus less on the Cold War and focus on helping Africa develop after this long period of colonization. They just kind of wanted to improve Africa. The leader at this time was Lumumba. So he announces neutrality in the Cold War, but then the one region of Congo, Katanga, that has the uranium.
Mm-hmm.
So he got that part of the Congo. I think they separated from the rest, and they declared their independence. So Lumumba, he didn't want them to split up, so he asked the UN for troops. So they sent in troops. But then he's having trouble with this in civil war.
Well, what happens is he goes to the UN because Belgium gets mad that the Congo is breaking away, so they send in troops with the help of the French and the British, and basically Belgium comes in and says, you're independent, but these mines aren't yours. And Congo's like, I kind of don't want you to take those away. So they go at war. They go ask the UN for help. They don't help. They go ask the US for help. The US doesn't help, but they go to the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union helps. And then the US, viewed as communist, they back a corrupt leader to dispose of Lumumba. He overthrows him in the US favors, and basically they send Lumumba off and torture him.
No, they torture him and they murder him in cold blood.
Yep.
Nice.
Just for the US's benefit of wanting to be democratic. Even though every democracy they put in place, it's literally authoritative, but it's a dictatorship, but it's not communistic. So they'd rather have a dictator than a self-selected government.
Yeah, they're like, we want to promote democracy throughout the world, unless the people want communism.
Yeah, they cared more about anti-communism than they did about democracy.
Yeah, Lumumba was planning to, nationalize and unite all of Africa and work on eternal development and education. And not even because he was installing a communistic government, because he asked for help of the Soviets. They killed him.
Stella said, did y'all talk about Marxism, Leninism yet?
I mean, yeah, we've
talked a bit about de-Stalinization.
Right.
Not necessarily like the roots of Marxism, Leninism.
Yeah, the roots of Marxism is going to be about 3 pages towards the beginning, but the whole guide is just them breaking away from Marxist-Leninism, and literally no one, maybe Fidel Castro when it talks about Cuba later on in the guide, but it's pretty much like the twisting of Marxist-Leninism and distorting it as a justification for mass genocides. So
I think both sides, like, you see the communists, they're taking Marxism, Leninism, and they're going away from that to commit these huge atrocities. And America has these really democratic roots, but they're going away from that to install these authoritative governments that are anti-communist. Yeah. So both are kind of like sacrificing their principles for this Cold War.
Yeah, because what Marxism and Leninism, is it's this democratic, well, not democratic, but like socialistic approach to the government where everyone, they kind of ruralize the economy and share resources with one another, and they're trying to dissuade these, as you see in America, the top 1%, and they hold all the wealth. That's what they're trying to fight against, and that was what Karl Marx and Lenin, who with the Bolsheviks overthrew the empire. But those pure intentions completely dissolve, and it becomes all ideological and murderous. Yes, they want to seize the means of production. You'll see.
Yeah,
You'll see that.
it kind of goes like with the concept of like the end. Do the ends justify the means? And that's kind of like a question that like the U.S. and Soviet Union, they were like, yes, it does, and that's why we have to compromise on our values to
Yeah.
install dictatorships.
Yeah, that and what Stella said, Stalin ruined it, and Stalin completely messed it up, and that's why Khrushchev was trying to de-Stalinize, but he has all these satellite states that are already committed to Stalinism, and it causes a lot of revolts, and it gets really muddy, and he kind of goes off on his own tangent of communism. You see that in China, Mao Zedong tries to return to pure Marxist Leninism with his Great Leap Forward, but
But that didn't work out very well.
No, because everyone goes and tries to colonize and murders. They have these mass genocides of revolt states, and there's just no pure intentions that you see in the original Marxism.
Wasn't the Great Leap Forward a period of like a whole lot of famines because their production systems weren't working right?
Yeah, it was supposed to be like all the nation's resources are mobilized into agriculture, and yeah, Darrow's got to go. Bye, Darrow. But
By Akadero.
Darrow. And yeah, they're trying to make a great leap forward. They're trying to standardize the food supply, and they want the economy to be streamlined. And it basically just backfires, and there's a mass famine, and there's again uprisings within the country. So it was a great leap. Okay, I'd say at about 5, we're gonna switch to math. There's a lot to take in math. If need be, I could share my screen and show some math on like Microsoft Paint. I guess I don't really have anything to draw on, but yeah, there's a lot to cover in math, so I think an hour will be fine. Okay, I'm gonna look at some of the talking points here and make sure we have everything covered.
Okay. If anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat right now or ask them.
How was your day?
Very good.
My day was pretty good.
My day is okay.
Why is your day only okay, Rolando?
I don't know. I haven't really been doing much. I had ice cream, and that's basically it.
Well, now you're in a great academic Zoom call with your friends, so.
Okay.
Noted. Yeah, no, we've hit everything. Okay, one more thing in section 2, because we've completely covered section 1. In section 2, you see Soviet censorships of Soviet authors, and you basically every great author and professor in Russia gets shut down for being anti-communistic. Some contemplate suicide, some get exiled, and it's pretty horrible. And there's like 2 Nobel Prize winners that came from Russia that were still exiled because of their anti-communistic beliefs. And you see the same thing happening in America. Some professors, like a huge group of professors in America, trusted professors, they're blacklisted. They're completely cut from their jobs. They're not allowed to get jobs anywhere else because they're abstractly associated with communism in some unproven way.
One interesting thing is, like, despite the censorship, there are also some instances where this art is being shared. Like, I don't know if you all heard of this, but the practice of samizdat, SAMIZDAT, and that's where the Soviet citizens would photocopy books like 1984, and then they would share them with all their friends.
Right.
and it was kind of dangerous because that could get them sent to the gulag, but
Mhm.
they shared it anyways.
Right. And 1984, by the way, is a good novel to mention. I'm surprised it wasn't picked this year for our
good book.
selected works.
Oh,
But
what was it picked for?
the what?
What was it picked for?
The book? The name of the book?
No. What was it picked? You said it was picked for.
Oh, I'm talking
Oh,
about. Yeah. That we in our literary section we have a focus book this year, a book we all read and discuss as a class. And I'm surprised it wasn't 1984. That is.
What is it again? What is the focus book?
So
Cat's
this book
Cradle.
this year is Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut, and I think there's a link to it in the Google Drive. It's a very good book.
I
Kind of
liked
this
it.
absurdist book.
Yeah, I think like the thing about noting like cracking down like that and people kind of going behind the government's back to like read these books, it kind of shows how like cracking down like that incentivizes people to question like why are they doing this? What do they want to hide? So it kind of has like the opposite effect of what they want.
Okay. I think. Are we ready to go over math? Does anyone have any more?
I'm gonna have to go to the bathroom. I'm gonna be right back. Okay.
Okay. I think I'm gonna.
I also need to go to the bathroom.
Okay. Yeah. We could take. Yeah. I'll start up at 5. I'll get my resources together and everything. Simple interest. Okay. Oh my God. Word processing. Okay. Wait. Can everyone see here? Oh, this is amazing. This will work.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, sweet. So basically, I'm going to go over some, math is, so you have simple concepts of simple interest, compound interest, permutations, combinations, probability, but it evolves into, it wants you to combine combinations and probability, like what is the probability of getting a 4 of a kind in poker? Well, you have to figure out you have to do combinations to figure out the amount of suits. You have to do probabilities, see what's the probability you get each card. So it's probability and combinations and permutations, but you have to do them in multi-step problems and use them intermittently. And we're not going to have it down by the summer, and we're going to allocate a lot of class time to learning about it. It's very important. And the part I haven't really talked about much is simple and compound interest, which.
Oh, hi, I'm back.
All right, welcome back. I was just talking about mathematics this year and how if you don't have it down yet, it's totally okay. It's something we're going to work on the whole year. Okay.
Whoa, did I?
You did just draw.
Oh, okay,
So
sorry.
you're good. What we start off here with is simple interest. And that's give me a second, guys. We have simple interest and compound interest. And I'm going to start with a discussion of these ideas right here. So, okay, simple interest. Do that. Go to my color, green. Okay. Simple
Khan Academy
interest.
who?
The simple interest formula is going to be P times 1 plus R times T. Okay. And compound interest is going to be P times 1.
Is it
plus,
1 or is it I?
It's a 1.
Okay.
over
And what do the letters stand for?
that thing. That's an excellent question, Christian. So P is going to be your initial value. So for example, if you started out with 4,500 monies and it was compounding with a simple interest of 10% every month. So you've took a loan of 4,500 and every month that you don't pay this back, the interest increases by, and this happens for a year. Okay, so you took an initial loan of 4,500 out. This one right here, that is a constant in your equation. That's never gonna change really. Yeah, so in both of these, you're always gonna have that one right there. And then plus your rate of interest, you're gaining 10% interest. So if you're gonna convert that to R, you're gonna put that a decimal. So 10% is 0.1. I think we all get that. So we have 1 plus 0.1 times, we're getting charged 12 months. We're getting charged monthly a year. We're trying to figure out our annual percentage, our APR, annual percentage rate. That's 12. So basically what we have there is 4,500. If you type that into your calculators, what do we get? Did I do that right? Is that 10%? Let me see.
I got my
1 plus
calculator
R
out.
times 2. Yeah. So if you look at simple, you ended up putting that times T. I'm getting really clogged up here. How do I clear this?
I was wondering if you could move your face cam, I guess, out of the math.
Yeah, that might have to be something you do from your computer. I don't have any option to do that.
No, it's on
my.
Yeah.
It's on mine. Because
It's-
on my, on my screen it's just a blank whiteboard.
Okay.
My
That's fine.
screen has the blank whiteboard as the big thing, and then at the top right, there are faces, and if you click them, then it swaps between Andy's face and the board.
Right.
So maybe if you click on that, the board will be big on your screen.
Yeah. So here is a sample problem. It says you borrow 250. Sorry, you borrow 250 at 5% simple interest per week. If you ended up owing $350, how long did it take you to pay back that loan? So your first off is identifying that it's a simple interest and not compound interest. With compound interest, you basically get charged more and more the longer you wait. But with simple interest, it's 5% per week, no change in the interest, so we could go ahead with our formula.
So you just plug in the formula and set it equal to the
Right.
amount you end up owing.
So yeah, you initially pulled out 250, and then you add on what 250 times 0.05 times T. Are we solving for T? Yeah, and we're solving for T, and that's going to equal 350 because it tells you about how much to get. So what we have now, if we simplify all this, we have 250 plus 12.5, 5% of 250 is 12.5, times T equals 350. We're solving for how many weeks it took for this interest to allocate into 350. All right. So we're going to, let's 250 plus, subtract by 350. Now we have 12.5 equals 100 if we subtract 250, right? 12.5 T.
Mm-hmm.
And then so T is going to equal 100 over 12.5. Okay, and we're working in units of weeks here. So 100 over 12.5 is 8.
That'd be
It takes
8 weeks.
8 weeks to get at a simple interest of 5% a week. It takes 8 weeks to get from 250 to 350. And when you're working with this section 1 simple interest and compound interest, you're largely looking at they're going to say solve for time, solve for initial loan, solve for rate. And you're going to, it's just linear algebra from there. Okay.
So what's like wording or verbiage that would help you identify simple versus compound if it doesn't directly tell you?
Okay. So with simple interest, okay, yeah. So like you said, it's mostly going to tell you, but in simple interest, the interest rate is constant in simple interest. Okay. Simple interest. So you can maybe look out something for at a constant rate of 5% or at a steady rate of 10%. When you have compound, what just happened? Okay, forget this. If you have compound interest, what you're looking for is, if it doesn't tell you, because most likely it will tell you, but you have compound interest, you're looking at, you have 5%. You could see words like APR. APR stands for annual, oh God, I forgot it.
Annual percentage rate.
Thank you. Annual percentage rate. So you'll see words like APR, you'll see compounded, that's all caps, compounded quarterly. You'll see words like, yeah, per year. But almost every compound interest problem I looked at had APR. APR is annual percentage rate, and it's a rate you solve for when you're doing compound interest. So it's always going to say APR.
Okay, excuse
Yeah.
me. Did I miss anything?
Yes. We were just talking about simple interest and compound interest.
Oh, Stella cannot hear Andy.
Oh no.
I can hear you though, Andy.
Okay. I can't see or hear anyone right now. It's just me and this whiteboard.
Oh, you can hear me.
Wow.
Well, I can hear people, but I can't see you guys, and I can't see your chats. So, Stella, I don't know how to open up my audio. I think it's something on your end. But the meeting, well, you can't even hear me, so someone will have to tell her. But the meeting's being recorded. So.
Okay.
So make sure Stella
I
knows
just
the meeting
texted
is
that to her.
recorded. Okay, thank you. And Rolando,
Yeah.
you missed my math on simple interest and compound interest. I'm gonna post the recording in the group meeting. Go back and
Oh,
watch.
after this, I'm also going to post some notes I've been taking over what Andy's been saying on that.
Right. Actually, yeah, I'm gonna post this meeting recording on the YouTube page. Right, Noah? And then we'll
Yeah.
give you guys the links to this page.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
I also have just a little formula chart I made based off what you said.
I think they went over this a little bit in pre-cal, so I think I am good on this topic. On math.
Yeah, you have to be a bit you're just gonna have to be a bit careful, Dominic, because you in pre-cal you recall solving for R, right?
Yes.
What you didn't cover in pre-cal is converting R to APR. And basically you're gonna take your R and multiply it by not NT. NT is what you see in your compound interest formula. It's not going to be NT, it's just going to be N, the number of pay periods in a single year. And you multiply those to get R to your annual percentage rate. Well, you get your APR, and then you convert it from a decimal to a percentage. And then
So the APR is our R times our T.
No, that's just a part of the formula, because you're not going to want to plug your APR into the formula, because the average APR on credit cards and houses and things like that are about 23%. So if you throw in 23 or even 0.23 to one of these equations, you're gonna get a overflow. And some of these problems I solved, you're looking at things such as 100 APR. So you're gonna, if you have a number like this, you're gonna want to reverse this process and do it backwards until you get your R. Plug in your R to the compound interest formula.
Is APR the combination of the variables, or is that a different?
No, APR is your annual percentage rate. So annual percentage rate, that means once a year, right? So it'll tell you it's compounded quarterly, bi-monthly, 52 weeks in a year. And you're gonna have to get your rate, this is just your standard compound interest, simple interest rate, and multiply it by the amount of interest periods. And then convert that decimal into a percentage, get your annual percentage rate. Yeah. So your annual percentage rate is not per se in the formula.
This is an example that might help some people. From the guide, it says an account that earns 5% APR monthly. That's one example. So
5%
5% APR compounded monthly.
What?
So you would do the R divided by the T.
Where are you at, Noah? What page is this?
Let's see. On page 7.
Page 7. 200 is invested at 2.5% APR compounded quarterly. Or is it below that?
It says, for example, an account earning 5% APR compounded monthly will earn 0.05 divided by 12 equals 0.4166.
I can't find that for some reason. Is it in a gray area or is it outside the gray areas?
It's just above a gray area.
Okay, for example. Oh, I see that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, he's saying you're earning 5% APR and it's compounded monthly. So that's 12 times a year. Okay. And R over T, that is part of, they present about 3 different compound interests or 2 different compound interest ratios or equations. This R times T is part of calculating the rate. So like if you're doing APR in the first equation, you would solve for APR for 0.05 because you're getting 5% APR monthly over the amount of pay periods, 12 times in a year. So that's going to equal 0.41%. So, well, yeah, 0.41%, not 41%. And this is your APR, which is a really low APR. And so basically, if you remember when I was multiplying, when I showed you, Dom, to do R times T, what Noah just talked about is the reversal of that process. Because this T right here, it's dividing by T, which is the amount of overall, like if you have 12 months, but 4 years, that 4 years is your T, those 12 months are your N. So you could either multiply by T or you can multiply by N or you can divide by T. So I'll scratch this all out to make it clear. APR could be R divided by T or R times N. Those are 2 ways to get your APR. All right, is that good for everyone?
Wait, what's N?
Okay, so in your APR formula, if we recall, we have P times 1 plus R over T to the power of NT. This NT, N, equals your amount of pay period. So if you have 4 years and you're getting paid monthly, you have 12 pay periods within a year, and then T equals those 4 years. So 4 years, 12 months, your N is the amount of times you get billed, and T is how long you're getting billed. Does that clear that up now? Okay.
Yeah, kinda.
Right. Of course, this is pretty rudimentary. Like I'm still learning with you guys, so expecting like any of this to make a lot of sense, it's not. We're gonna have to work the whole year on this math as we usually do. But that is it for compound interest and simple interest. Now we're talking about pizza. So you go to a local shop, they're offering pepperoni, sausage, and cheese as the toppings. And you could get thin crust, you could get bulky crust. You could get super thin, um, doughy dough crust. So
Isn't it
so
just stuffed crust?
yeah, or stuffed crust. You could do stuffed crust. Oops, not
That's good.
stuffed crust. Yeah. So basically, what we're trying to answer is how many combinations of pizzas are there?
I think it's one topping pizzas to start out with.
Yeah. I'm not following what they presented per se, but like
Oh,
this is an example of multiplication rule 1.
So wouldn't it be like let's say you get pepperoni, there are 4 different variables of what you could do with that. So that's 4. And there's 3 total toppings, so it'd be like 12 total combinations.
Exactly, that's it.
Yeah.
So if you go here, there's 4 options for the pepperoni and so forth. So you get the number of possibilities on one side times the other possibilities, 12 total combinations of pizzas. That's really easy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it gets worse. It gets a lot
Okay.
worse. Yeah, that's the first page. It's introducing you to multiplication rule 1. Multiplication rule 2 is when selecting 2 objects from different groups. It's basically, so let's see. Let's say now the pizza place has 7 toppings, 7 different toppings, and now they have 11 different toppings. Well, now our obviously our multiplication rule is still going to apply, but what rule number 2 is saying is that rule 1 is constant despite number of categories. So we're still going to have, in that scenario, we would have 77 pizzas. So, and now if they threw something in like, okay, now they're offering 4 more crusts. If they're offering 4 more crusts, multiplication rule states that we could just multiply that by 4 to get 308. So that's hard to put into words. But if we were to add 4 more crusts, multiplication rule is saying we could just do this to get the amount of pizzas. I know it's a bit monochromatic, but does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
How exactly are we using 4 to get the same amount?
We're using 4 because we're operating under condition that, I'll write it up here. Pizza place added more crust. They added 4 more crusts to their menu. So instead of deconstructing our formula and multiplying it all together again, multiplication rule 2 says we could just get that plus 4 and multiply it with 77 to get 308. Good?
Oh, okay. I think I get it.
Yeah. If you don't have clear understanding, welcome to my world. It's going to take a bit for us all to understand this, but I promise you, I'm not presenting you wrong information. Yeah.
Andy, are you sure about 308 pizzas?
I might have made a typo there. Yeah.
Now, essentially, they have 15 possible crusts total, right?
Well, we know that there's 77 possible pizzas before they added these new crusts, right?
I think
So-
what you're doing is
Oh,
adding,
no, you're right. So instead of 4 crusts, they added 4 more sizes. This is, yeah, okay. Yeah, so 4 more sizes, it's the same principle. They added
Oh, okay.
4 more of a new category, and that goes into 308. So like 4 new sizes. If you read the guide, it says that this is a pizza problem I'm trying to do. They took the product of this, multiplied it with the 4 new sizes, and got 77.4, which I was trying to do. I got mixed up, but basically, if you get a new digit of information, instead of starting over and reconstructing your whole equation, you could just add this times 4, those 4 new categories, and it'd be like 77 times 11 times 4. That's number 2. Rule 1 is constant despite number of categories. As we see here, there's a new category, but you still just multiply them all in a row. So sorry for the mix-up there, but I hope that still made sense. We're all good?
Yeah, that makes more
Alright.
sense now.
Okay.
I believe so.
Okay. It's okay,
Okay,
if
good job.
you don't. Yeah, if you don't get it, we're hitting math all year.
Just trying to get a brief grasp.
So now we're moving on to the final form of the multiplication rule, and it revolves around NK. So if anyone's following along on the guide, it's a bit to type out, so I'll just read it to you. I have 16 different shirts, 9 different pairs of pants, 2 pairs of shoes, 3 belts, and 12 ties. So if we assume multiplication rule 1, we would just multiply those all together and get 10,368. But multiplication rule, the final one, is trying to get us to understand that. It's simplified better in example 1.2b. 8 runners are running a 200-meter dash. So if we're trying to see what different sequences of rushes, like he could finish second, he could finish third. There's 8 different people that can be, it's more of like NK really, because there's 8 people, N represents the people, A represents the possibilities. So there's 8 people racing with, what is that? 8 places, 8 people
Yeah.
can either
So
come any variety.
each person has 8 possible places where they can be.
Right. So if we plug in there's 8 people, there's 8 positions. We do 8 to the power of 8. We find that is that 8 to the power of 8? Yeah. So
Yep.
we see that that's 16 million. Okay, but there's a catch here, in that this is not a combination. This is actually a permutation, and that extends into the discussion of what is a permutation and what is a combination. A permutation is a combination really, but the order matters. Combination, but the order matters. So you can't, like if you're running, for example, in our election this year, if you're running for vice president or president, sure, that could be any combination of anyone winning, but me being a president versus me being a vice president, in theory, not really, they're different weights. They have different standings and different powers, and they have different roles. So it can't be a combination because they don't have equal weight. And obviously the combination would be that, I mean, combination.
Like ACACAT co-presidents.
Yeah, order does not matter. Yeah, so in terms of me and Noah being co-presidents, whether he won first or I won second or any of that, it doesn't matter because we're both president. Okay, but so what a permutation is, it extends into introducing this idea of a factorial. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of a factorial before, like that. So in our race problem, it matters who finishes first and who finishes second, right? You get medals for if you finish first, if you finish second. So therefore, the order of runners matters. So we're going to be looking for a factorial here. So
one way you could think about this is the first person in the race, taking a random person. There's 8 places in the race they could be. They could be in first place, second place, all the way to 8th place. But then take the second place. Since you already looked at the first person, there's only 7 places that this next person could possibly take up. Yeah. And if you look at the next person, because you already know the positions of 2 other people, that means there's only 7 places, 6 places.
And this year's math tests, they are timed. So I have a calc tip. Instead of trying to multiply that all out in your calculator, you could do 8, and then you're gonna do math. This is in a TI-84. Math, probability, and then, what is it, 4?
Mm-hmm.
Math, probability 4. and that will give you, that will result in 8 factorial.
I got 40,320.
40,320 is the answer to the bottom way, so it works. All right. Let's see. Now, yeah, okay. So here is something similar to that present problem we just pulled up. The math, or let's say the academic team at your high school has 40 members. How many ways can a president and a vice president be elected? Okay, so there's 40 members. So hypothetically speaking, any 40 of them could win this president's spot, okay? But if one person wins, then there's only 39 people left. And order matters, right? This is a permutation. So that's why we're using a factorial. It's a permutation because order matters, because president and vice president have different roles. Okay. And then we'd keep going down, 38, 37, right? But no, we wouldn't, because we have 2 trials here, because once the president and the vice president are elected, it stops. There's no more government in this situation. So therefore there's 1,560, because all you're doing is multiplying those, 1,560 possible combos of a president and a vice president. That one's pretty easy, right?
Okay.
Is that good for everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. 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 So this brings up, okay, so 30 out of 40 of the people in academic, this isn't true, but in academic, they go on to compete in competition. So assuming this condition, how many different ways can 30 competitors be selected? And what we're going to do here is
I know this.
Oh yeah, you could draw on this whiteboard right now if you want to do this.
Let me see. So you'd start with would you start with 30?
You would.
Would it be
yeah.
30, 29? That might not be the best drawing. Like that?
Well, okay, what's actually going to happen here is we're leaving 10 people out. So yes, that is happening, but we're actually going to take this out. We're going to take our 40 factorial and we're going to divide by 10 factorial. We're going to, so 10 times 9 times 8 and so on, they're going to be taken out of the sequence. Why? Because only 30 people are going.
Oh,
So what Noah
okay.
showed up, that 30 factorial, we're gonna divide by 10 factorial to account for it. And 40 factorial over 10 factorial is, I could work that out on my calculator real quick. But before I do that, what that just did is the permutations formula, which is n factorial times n minus k factorial. So our n, our number of people going, or the number of people we're selecting from is 40. And then 30 people are going. K equals our selection. So 40 people are going. So we discount those 30. And then that's raised to a factorial. You have 40 factorial over 10 factorial. And you could leave your answer to this, honestly.
I think another way to think of this is what you're basically saying is you're doing 40 times 39 times 38 and so on until you get to 10 and stop at 10 because 10 members won't be included.
Exactly. That's exactly what it's saying. Yes, in a way that gives you your answer immediately. All right. Moving on. We have, this is the combinations formula, we have n factorial over n minus 2 factorial times 2. Okay, so if we were doing
And factor.
okay, I'm looking for a problem right now. If okay, a bakery shop makes 5 different types of cookies: cookies, chocolate chip, sugar, oatmeal, peanut butter, and raisin. That's 5 different types of cookies. To promote their cookies, they're having a sample set. So we know that they're selecting 2 cookies to not go in the bag. So if we do 5 minus 3 factorial, we remember that, right? That gives us 2 factorial. So this is going to be 5 prime over 5 minus 3 prime.
Okay. Oh, Dominic's going now. Bye, Dominic.
Bye, Dominic.
Thanks. This was helpful.
No problem. And we'll definitely hit
Have a good
the-
ACA day.
Mhm.
Are
You
you
guys-
guys just gonna add ACA to every,
Yes,
ward
yes.
that you can?
Okay, yes.
ACA, yeah.
So if you do the math for that, I believe, what does that get you? If we have 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 over 2 times 1. When I get 5 factorial, yeah, 5 times 4 times 3 is 60. So there's 60 possible. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Because these are going to cancel out. 2 times 1 and 2 times 1 cancel out. So you're left with 5 times 4 times 3. 5 times 4 is 20 times 3 is 60. 60 is your answer. I'm not going to go. There's a second half of that problem that goes into some expanding that example. I don't want to. I don't understand it too well, so I'm not going to try to teach it and confuse people. If you, okay, so using that same permutation, it's saying that the bakery wants to have sampler bags, but they have 4 different types of cookies per bag. How many sampler bags are possible? So using those 5 types of cookies, what we have 5 prime over 5.
Yeah, we would do 4
4
factorial, right?
on top. Wait, no, because in that top problem, our k is 3, now our k is 4, right? Or did I do it wrong?
I don't know. I think I'm just a little confused.
Yeah, we all are. Actually, I'm not going to teach this one. I don't get it. Or I do get it, but I don't. It's going to be confusing. So what the final evolution of the combination formula is n prime over n minus k prime times k prime.
Okay. I don't want to sound like insulting or anything, but like, what does this have to do with the Cold War?
There's just math. Like
So
every year,
for
like there's a math and it cycles through 3 different maths. So one year we'll have like this is just like basic math and differential calculus. I don't know what next year is going to be. And then the 3rd year in the cycle is algebra and trig, and that just cycles and it doesn't relate to the topic. It's just math.
No, well,
Okay.
actually, remember we talked about game theory and the computer simulations running the different amount of outcomes?
Oh, that's true. That's true.
This is it. This is how it relates to the Cold War, because this are the essential fundamentals of game theory. So that, in a sort of abstract way, that's how it relates to the Cold War.
all in all, academic is kind of about showing proficiency in a lot of subjects and just being
Right.
academically diverse. So normally you kind of take one topic and you look at it through multiple academic angles, like music, art, history. but math is usually one that's separate from the other ones. So math doesn't always relate to the main topic. So that's
Yeah.
why
I
math
hate
doesn't
it.
necessarily relate to the Cold War.
The last thing we're going to hit here is probability. This year, I believe they only provided us with binomial probability. So some basics of probability. What's your chance of rolling a 2 and 1 trial of a dice? 1/6, right? This is the number of ways the event could occur one way. And here are the possibilities. Event over possibilities. 1/6. And this again ties into the game theory. So if I were to ask you, what is the probability of getting heads
Oh, you'd say
5
the number
times?
of events possible would be 1 over the total number that are possible, which would be 2.
Right, exactly. So that's your probability right there. But if you want to figure out what's the probability of that happening 5 times in a row, you're going to multiply these together 5 times, or alternatively 1/2 to the 5th.
So that'd be like 1/32.
That would be 1/32. So
Does
that's
it go
probability.
into like the difference between dependent and independent?
No, what it does go into, it's going to tell you what's the probability of getting 3 heads and 2 tails. But
So wouldn't
how-
that just be 1/2 for all of them?
Not that's what I assumed, but what it's saying here is it wants you to use combination 5 choose 3. And by the way, in your calculator, if you go back to probability, there's NCR and NPR, and they're a shorthand way of doing probability. And also you have a binomial. So I wish I want to try to share my screen to go to an online calculator. I don't think I can do that. But okay, so one way I would solve this problem is actually using my calculator. So if we want to get this, we're going to go second vars. Oh, not 111. Second vars. And then we're going to scroll down until we get to A. Second vars, alpha A. And we're going to approach binom PDF. If you click on binom PDF, you have trials, P, and X value. So you have, where'd my mouse go? You have trials, P, and X value. So in this case, we're flipping the coin 5 times. We have 5 trials. Our constant probability is 1/2. In binomial, the probability will never change unless specifically stated. And we're trying to get 3 heads, right? What's important here is we have to define getting heads as a success, because the X value is the number of successes. Okay. If you plug that into your TI-84, what number do you get? You get 0.3125, right?
0.3125.
That's the answer. So I this morning I went through it all. I did all the handwritten math, and this is going to save you so much time. This gives you, we're doing binomial probability. This finds binomial probability for you. Right?
Nice.
Yeah. So that is it for section 1. Or that is it for this week's reading, actually.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, I don't think anyone has any questions. Good job today, ACACats. Pause in.
There we go, Dom.
Can't see.
I bet Julian is doing it too. Okay, a lot of people left the meeting, but that's okay. Everyone who stayed, you have a higher chance of making the team. Just keep doing your summer reading.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Meow.
Meow.
Yeah.
That's a wall.
That's how her watch lit up.
All right. I'm going to upload this recording to the YouTube channel.
What's it called?
We're about to talk it at the dismissal of this meeting. We're gonna talk about it in the group meeting. So just keep your eyes on the group meeting.